Well, with their win over LSU on Saturday, Alabama moved up to number 2 in this week's college football playoff rankings, while Clemson and Ohio State stayed 1st and 3rd, respectively. Notre Dame, whose only loss came at Clemson, is ranked 4th ahead of unbeaten Iowa, Baylor, and Oklahoma State. Who should be the last team in, Stephen A.?
Well, I'm going to say to you, I'm going to stick with Notre Dame simply because of what I said last week. Although Skip Bayless, I'll give Oklahoma State a lot of credit because I didn't expect them to beat TCU. They did that. They moved up 6 spots, though. So I'm not going to sit there and poo-poo that. They're now in a position where if they continue to win some games and there's any kind of movement in the top 4, then it's going to be what it is. I think what's helping Notre Dame, Skip, watching them against Clemson, being down 14-0, coming back against Clemson, making a game of it the way that they did and losing 24-22. I think Notre Dame being in the top 4, Skip, is a product of the respect that Clemson has garnered this year. And because Clemson is thought so highly of, and the fact that Notre Dame gave them such a run for their money, I think that resonates with them. When I think about Notre Dame beating number 21 Temple, yeah, that's good because Temple's good this year. But at the same time, let's see what they do moving forward. Obviously beating Georgia Tech, who was ranked 14th at the time, with that kind of offense that Georgia Tech runs. Notre Dame deserved a lot of credit for that. But outside of that, you just look at their schedule, and it didn't necessarily wow you or move you or whatever the case may be. But because of the way they played against Clemson, the fact that they beat Georgia Tech, their non-conference, their Notre Dame, then they went and they beat Temple. They beat the bodies in front of them with the exception of Temple. Oklahoma State, again, they deserve some credit. I have a problem with the fact that Iowa seems to have leaped over Baylor because I think Baylor should have been ahead of them. But overall, looking at it, I certainly have no problem with the fact that Roll Tide, Alabama, has moved up to number 2. Clemson deserves to stay at number 1. I don't think LSU should have dropped all the way down to number 9. I'd like to see Michigan State in the mix, but for the time being, with time to go, I'm going to say that I have no problem with Notre Dame being in the position that they're in right now. They lost their starting quarterback. They still went out there and they're doing what they're doing, and I'm going to give them credit for that.
Yeah, they also lost their best running back and their best tight end, and this is a highly impressive job that they're doing to stay afloat.
Brian Kelly's doing a good job.
Do you think they'll finish in that 4th spot? Will they be in the playoffs?
I don't have their schedule in front of me. Who do they play next? Who does Notre Dame play next?
I'll help you out here.
Okay.
I believe Notre Dame will lose at Stanford. That's what's going to happen. I believe Stanford will wind up being the 4th team in. Obviously, Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, and Stanford from the Pac-12. And they're still going to have to win their championship game. But I believe that Stanford suffered the biggest upset of the year in college football, and it happened to be on opening weekend, opening Saturday at Northwestern, a game that I just happened to watch. It ended up 16-6 Northwestern. We all thought, certainly people on our show, Antoine, our Northwestern grads,
Go Wildcats.
Go Wildcats. Here they came, and they haven't proven to be quite what we thought they were going to be, which is why that's such a big 16-6 upset. But after Stanford started to establish young Christian McCaffrey as both a ball carrier and a receiver, I got to tell you, Stephen, he's climbed into my Heisman conversation, and I think it'll only get better for young Christian McCaffrey as he's been their dynamo, and they have caught fire around his offensive capabilities, and all of a sudden they've won every game since. I just think at home they can beat Notre Dame. It'll be a tough game, battle, but I'm going to go with Stanford to win out. Now, I come from Big 12 country, Oklahoma. I'm sorry, I don't love the Big 12's chances here because even if Oklahoma State wins out, and the schedule was good to them this year because, as you point out, they got TCU, and boy, they beat the heck out of TCU in Stillwater. Now they get Baylor in Stillwater, and they get Oklahoma in Stillwater. Way to go, Oklahoma State. But I just think the committee will look down this schedule and say, well, they won on a fluky late break at Texas, which they did. And then they'll say, well, they beat Kansas State by 2. They barely survived in overtime at West Virginia. They gave up 53 in a victory over Texas Tech, but giving up 53 points. Again, highly impressive. They were ahead 42-16 over TCU. But I'm just afraid, even if they win the last two games against Baylor and Oklahoma and are unbeaten, that Stanford will be given the edge off its strength of schedule and win against Notre Dame if, in fact, they win.
Skip, that's exactly where I was going. I got to ask you this question. How do you feel about the Pac-12 this year?
Not bad, pretty good, pretty deep.
The reason why I ask you that question is because outside of that one loss to Northwestern, Stanford has won 8 straight. Okay, so I'm looking at them at 8-1 right now. They're positioned at the number 7 spot. All right, so you've got them ahead of Oklahoma State. Let's say both of them win out and they win all of their games. Who do we give the edge to? Because again, Stanford, if they beat Notre Dame, then you know Notre Dame's going to fall out the top 4 spot. But I'm looking at their wins here. You beat USC 41-31 when they were ranked 6th in the nation.
Pretty good.
You beat UCLA 56-35 when they were ranked 18th in the nation. But now I'm looking at it. It's Washington at Washington State, Colorado. You beat all of those teams. Then now you've got Oregon, who's fallen off the map. You've got California.
I think they've lost 4 in a row.
That's right. And Notre Dame. So again, you win Notre Dame. So I got to look at USC, UCLA, and Notre Dame. Does those 3 wins get them in over Oklahoma State? If Oklahoma State ends up running the table, does it enable them to leapfrog Baylor and Iowa? That's the question.
Okay, Iowa, I think, will lose in the Big Ten championship game to Ohio State. I'm projecting that.
I agree. I agree
so
with that.
That would eliminate Iowa from this discussion.
Okay.
And yet, I just think on the strength of a late win against a team highly regarded by the committee, Notre Dame, that will be more impressive than 3 home wins in Stillwater by Oklahoma State over the Big 3, if in fact they can pull this off, obviously, Baylor, Oklahoma, TCU. So, again, to me, on my eye test, the best team in the Big 12 to me is my Oklahoma Sooners team. But Bob Stoops, once again, did not have them ready for their arch rival game against a Texas team that has proven not to be very good. And on the strength of that, you're out. And can Baylor win out? They've got Oklahoma this Saturday night, as you know, and then at Oklahoma State, at TCU, and Texas. I don't think Baylor can win out.
I think Baylor's losing one of those games.
I agree.
So I think that knocks them out. Iowa loses the Big Ten championship. It knocks them out, which means that we're talking about Stanford and Oklahoma State possibly leapfrogging, over those teams and knocking Notre Dame out. Because we know if Notre Dame beats Stanford, they ain't moving from the top 4. Notre Dame will be in the mix. Okay, but I believe you. I agree with you. I think they will lose at Stanford. So it's Stanford and it's Oklahoma State. What happened to Michigan State?
Just a loss happened. That's what happened.
Right. And by the way, since that's only 1 loss for LSU, how fair is it that LSU drops from number 2
they could
to
get
number
back
9?
In the conversation. They could.
I'm just saying, because I'm like, how did they drop? How do you drop LSU? LSU went up against Alabama. I had, Mark May and Robert Smith and all of these guys. They're saying to me, they're looking at Alabama, arguably the best team in the nation.
Could be.
Nobody's disrespecting Clemson, but if Alabama is all that and a bag of chips, how are we gonna knock LSU 7 spots? I don't understand that.
Well, how many SEC teams do you want in the Final Four? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
Skip, your Final Four right now are Clemson, Ohio State, Stanford, and
Alabama.
All right. We will leave it there. Wait till you hear what Jerry Jones said about Tony Romo's future. We'll tell you.